Today we are going to start a new topic in the lifespan development, that is adulthood, and we are going to talk about the socio-emotional development in this particular stage of life. When we talk about the socio-emotional development, then we totally understand this phenomena and this thing that we are going to talk about how the society, how the emotional responses and how the person's psychological characteristics are going to play their role, and they are going to be integrated, and how that integrated experience of emotional experiences and their relationships and their daily activities are going to be anticipated, and how they are going to play their role, and how they are going to integrate all these different domains of their life in their adulthood. So when we are talking about that stage, we are going to talk about the stability and change in the childhood, which is going to lead from childhood to adulthood. And under that, first of all, we are going to talk about the temperaments in the adulthood. As if you have seen the last video, you would know that we have combined the early adulthood and the middle adulthood. So right now we are talking about the early adulthood, and after that we are going to have some other things and some other concepts which are covered in the middle adulthood separately under this same lecture as well. So first, when we are talking about the temperaments, as we all know, that these are individuals' behavioral styles and characteristic emotional response. The temperament is according to which a person is going to behave in his own situation, according to the emotional response or according to the emotional aspect of that particular situation. For example, if someone takes some situation so much harshly, or they are going to react or overreact towards that situation, so that means that individual's behavioral style is being influenced by his emotional response. That's why he is doing that. So people used to take his temperament as a short temper person, as easy to get angry or easy to get aggressive. So these are the temperaments which we used to assess, and which we used to understand, and which we also experience by ourselves in the form of temperaments, which are our emotional responses, and which are our behavioral responses in response to our emotional responses as well. So when we are talking about these, then we can say that in early adulthood, these emotional responses are going to be much more stable and much more stable, and we can say they are much more adaptive in the early adulthood than the adolescence. As in adolescence, as we have discussed before, that there are going to be more mood swings, there is more going to be instability in the mood and emotional patterns of the people. So when they are going to be more responsible, they are going to be involved in less risk-taking behavior, which is the age of early adulthood as well. So we can also link through different longitudinal studies which have taken into account the people from different ages, and they tested them at their different ages. For example, they took a sample, and then they assessed them at certain age. Then after some time, for example after 1-2 years or 5 years, they assess the same individual again to identify what are the changes in the same individual, and how they can anticipate that how the temperaments are going to be stable, and what changes are going to be seen in the same individual over the course of time and over the course of different years and the age in which he is going to perform in that particular time. So in those longitudinal studies, when they identified the children who were highly active at 4 years of age, they found them to be more extrovert and more outgoing at the age of 23. So we can see that there is some link. We cannot say 100% of the time, but longitudinal studies have shown that there is some link, that if the child is going to have some sort of temperament or some sort of aptitude, that might be continuing towards some other phase of his life as well. So through these longitudinal studies, there are several different types and dimensions during childhood, and with which characteristics of the adult personality could be linked. So we are going to talk about those characteristics which could be linked in the adulthood from the childhood. the first could be that easy and difficult temperaments. When we talk about that, then in the longitudinal study it has been figured out, and there is an evidence that easy temperament at 3 to 5 years of age were likely to be well adjusted as young adults. And if you are wondering what easy temperament would be, the person, the child who is quite flexible, or the child who is quite adaptive, and the child who is not that much repulsive or resistant in his situation. So that is the easy temperament, because he understands the situations and he sometimes accepts everything in his environment, and sometimes he rejects, but he is going to be an easy child if that situation could be settled. If he is not that much, the difficult temperament of the child would be that there are anger outbursts on every single thing, or there are more frequent anger outbursts than the calm time periods, because we cannot say that easy temperament or easy child is never going to have the anger outbursts or temper tantrums. There could be, but they are not frequent and they are very rare in the easy temperament child. So when the easy temperament children were assessed at the 3 to 5 years of age, they found that they were well adjusted as young adults as well. In contrast, when children who had difficult temperaments, we have just discussed, at the 3 to 5 years of age, they were not well adjusted in the young adulthood. Then when we talk about inhibition temperament in childhood are less likely than other adults to be assertive or experience social support. We can say that individual who has inhibited temperament, they are restricted, they are not having that much emotional outlet maybe in that particular situation. So those children who are having that, they are not going to be that much assertive, and they are not going to experience that much social support in that environment. Why they are not going to be assertive? Because their emotional expression or emotional experiences or their wishes and feelings have been undermined, or they are inhibited. So in contrast to that situation, the disinhibition in the toddler years is also linked with career stability in the middle adulthood, and also a good level of self-efficacy, because if there is no inhibition, the child is not restricted in that early years, so he has full expression of his thoughts, he has full expression of his emotions, and a balanced expression, we can say. Mostly it is going to be a balanced expression of his emotion. So as we can see that he is going to be more assertive. As we said in the other case, if there is an inhibition, he is not going to be assertive. He could be aggressive, he could be passive, but he is not assertive in any case. So another condition or another characteristic of the temperament we can link through longitudinal studies, ability to control one's emotions. When a person is going to have some sort of control over his own emotions, and we have seen it in longitudinal studies that 3 years old children who showed good control of their emotions, they were more resilient, they were more tolerant in the face of stress. Why is that so? Because they learned over the period of time in the healthy environment and in the healthy child rearing environment, and in the atmosphere where they have survived and they have flourished. So they learned from that environment that how well their adults or how well people around them control their emotions and how they manage their emotions, which helped them to resolve the situation or the stress they were experiencing. So the children who are having good sense of control, and this is not inhibition, this is a good sense of control over their emotions for the sake of that situation, they are good and they are resilient and they are more tolerant towards the stress situations. And the 3-year-old who had low emotional control, they are not that much resilient and they can show different problems in the young adult age as well. And the high level of emotionality at 6 years of age is associated with depression in the adulthood as well. So we can see over here that how the temperaments are stable and how they are going to affect the later development of the child as well. Let's move on. And when we talk about when we are talking about the stability and change from childhood to adulthood, then after temperaments we can move towards the attachment. As we already know, different attachment styles are there which were given by Baldwin, and now we are going to discuss that how these attachment styles are linked with the adulthood temperaments and the socio-emotional development. as we discussed, temperaments, they are going to continue and they are going to influence the later years of the child life in the adulthood as well. Then attachment also appears during the infancy, and that is going to play its role in the adult age as well. The securely attached infants, those who find their secure base with their parents, they explore the environment and they think that their caregiver is the most protective figure, and they find them more secure than the environment. So they are securely attached as well, and their emotional and physical needs are being met over there. So similarly, when adults may count on their romantic partners to be secure base to which they can return and obtain comfort and security in stressful times, then they are going to have good romantic relationships, and the survival of their relationship is going to be better if they have experienced a secure attachment in the childhood. Then we can talk about the securely attached child at 1 year of age were securely attached 20 years later in their adult romantic relationship as well. This is also a longitudinal study which stated that and which found the link. And then another longitudinal study found that insecure or avoidant attachment at 8 years of age was linked to a lower level of social initiative and pro-social behavior and a higher level of social anxiety and loneliness at 21 years of age. So I guess it is quite understandable that when the child's attachment is secure, then they are having good relationship which are going to influence their later lives. When the child had avoidant attachment style, then they are going to be hesitant to be involved in the relationships later in their lives, and if they are going to be involved in that relationship, they are going to be have the pro-social behavior as well, which is not going to sustain that relationship for a longer duration of time, and they are going to experience social anxiety, loneliness, depression, and all those things. Then anxious attachment, when we talk about that, then they demand closeness and they are less trusting, more emotional and jealous and possessive. So anxious attachment style is also not a healthy attachment style which can sustain some romantic or intimate relationships in the later life. They can sustain, but there is going to be a lot of highs and lows in that relationship because of their apprehension towards that particular caregiver or that particular romantic partner as well. Consistently positive caregiving over a number of years is likely to have important factors in connecting early attachment with functioning later in development. Longitudinal study have further studied and showed evidence that change, and whenever there is going to be a change in attachment security or insecurity from infancy to adulthood, were linked with the stresses and the supports of socio-emotional context. So there are two things which can play their role, that how environment is playing their role and how their attachment style are going to play their role. So when we talk about them, then it is very much essential to recognize that attachment security is in infancy does not always by itself produce long-term positive outcome, but rather it needs to be linked to the later outcomes or connections with the way children, adolescents, and adults subsequently experience various social contexts. So it is very much important that it is not just the attachment style which is going to prove you right in the child's early years that he is going to have very much good, stable, sustained relationships in the romantic and partner relationship and intimate relationship. So it is not a guarantee, but it is going to play a positive role, because in the next few years and in the adult life as well, his social context is also going to play its own role. So it is going to be the integration of his own attachment style and the environmental factors which are going to play their role in the stability of that particular interaction and that particular relationship. So now let's move towards another dimension of early adulthood psychosocial and socio-emotional development, that is attraction, love, and close relationship. When we talk about these, first let's come towards the attraction. And when we are talking about the attraction in early adulthood, then we have to keep in mind the age that is going to be after adolescence, immediately after adolescence, that is around 20 years and 20 plus. So when we are talking about the attraction, the thing which is going to be discussed first is going to be the first impressions. Those first impressions, as in psychology as well, we can say, as you have already understood, that first impression is going to be the last impression. So it is not totally true, but it has some truth in it, that, and psychology proved that as well, that in one study judgments were made after 100 millisecond exposure time of unfamiliar faces and were sufficient for individuals to form an impression of another person. So with just for the 100 millisecond, a person was exposed and the other person has just created an impression of that person immediately. And we can say that either these first impressions are accurate or not. Then number of studies have done that, and they have found that immediate and impressions can be accurate because they are based on very little evidence, so we cannot rely on them very much appropriately, but they can provide a very good accurate picture of and they can accurately detect the person's romantic interest in them as well. And that people used to have the first impression, and they can identify the sexual orientation of the person, how violent that person is, how in romantic interest that person has, and people used to find out and figure out all these aspects in just the first impression. But the first impressions could be misleading, as they can encounter that these could differ on the basis of the intelligence as well, and a lot of other factors which can involve in that context as well. Then when we talk about the familiarity and similarity in the attraction, then familiarity is the thing that is going to breed the contempt. Familiarity, we can say, as people used to say, that researchers have found that familiarity is an important condition for a close relationship to develop. For a long-lasting relationship, a familiarity is going to be required, and similarity, we can say that the birds of a feather flock together. We can say that this can explain the attraction. For example, our friends and lovers are much more like us than they unlike us. You used to make friends who you think are having combined attitudes, who are having combined hobbies, or who are having combined lifestyles like you, rather than you like them to be unlike you. So we used to have friends and the partners in our life who are more like us and who are more familiar, who are having more similarities with us, then we are going to choose them. For some reasons, and you would anticipate and you would also question that there are some situations in which opposites attracts as well. So those characteristics in which the opposite attracts, an introvert may wish to have an extrovert partner because he is going to fill that gap which is missing in one person, and that extrovert may be looking for some introvert to fill that gap which is missing in his life. So that could be the one aspect of that as well. When we talk about that, mostly people are going to be attracted towards the similarity. That is because of the consensual validation is the one reason why people used to find similar values, attitudes and lifestyle in other person. Consensual validation is that our attitudes and values are supported by another person who is near to us, who is close to us, and who is our partner in that relationship. So if our ideas and attitudes, culture, everything is going to be supported and values are being supported by another person, then we are going to feel more good things towards that person. And similarity is going to matter in that the people tend to shy away from the unknown people. So that is going to be one more reason for that similarity to play its role in the attraction. Then when we are talking about the physical attractiveness in the attraction, then physical attractiveness is going to have its role, as we can say that in attraction, the psychologists do not consider the link between physical beauty and attraction to be as clear-cut as many advertising agencies would like us to believe. For example, psychologists have determined that men and women differ on the importance of good looks. When they seek an intimate partner, women tend to rate as most important such critical consideration, honesty, dependability, kindness, understanding and earning prospects are those things which which women used to find in their partner, and men used to prefer good looks, cooking skills, and frugality. So these are the over the world and worldwide ideas which are similar to our own culture and to our own society as well. So these are the criteria of physical attractiveness which people used to figure out in another person when they are choosing a partner. Then when we talk about the matching hypothesis, that we choose partners who match our own level of attractiveness. So this is one attribute, one psychological attribute, that is matching hypothesis, that we need to find those people and we consider them more and we prefer them more attractive who are having some sort of similarity and some sort of physical attractiveness equal to our own. Then let's talk about the phases of love, and when we are talking about the love and intimacy now, then in intimacy you can see that intimate relationships are those relationships in which there is self-disclosure and sharing of the private thoughts is there. So that is the main point of intimacy. And when we talk about the Erikson gave the stages, and in which he argued that identity versus identity confusion, which was the stage of adolescence, that is going to go forward towards here as well, and that is going to have an influence on the intimacy versus isolation stage, which is going to the middle in the early child, in the early adulthood. The adult is going to go through in the intimacy versus isolation, in which the person is seeking intimacy. He is finding someone close, someone intimate, some partner in his life, and they want to oneself, while losing oneself into another person, they want to merge with someone else, and the failure to achieve intimacy is going to result in the social isolation in this stage. And intimacy, as we can see, that you want to be attached, you want to have some commitment with another person, and if that is not going to be fulfilled, then the person is going to experience the isolation as well. Intimacy and dependence are the balance between intimacy and commitment, and independence and the freedom. These are the things which a person used to find in their intimate relationship. When we talk about friendships, then in friendships, the opportunity for new friendships as individuals move to new locations and may establish new friendships in their neighborhood or at work as well. There are going to be gender differences in how people used to approach those friendships, and the friendships between women and men are going to be of different type and different have different context in that. For example, when we are talking about the figures from US, that men and women have the best friends, 92% of the women have, 88% of men have a best friend of the same sex. So mostly male and female used to prefer their own gender as best friend. Mostly this used to happen. And when we talk about the romantic love, then it is that in some friendships evolve into romantic love, and that is which is also called passionate love as well. And romantic love has strong components of sexuality and infatuation, and we are going to have this model over here. We are going to discuss it shortly, that infatuation and sexuality, and it is often predominates in the early part of the love relationship. There are some studies and some researches which have been done, and they have found that males show higher avoidance and lower anxiety about romantic love than females do, because they are not having that much into that particular situations. Females used to be more sensitive towards these things, so they are going to have more, they are going to show more of those things and more of anxiety towards that, and males are going to have more avoidance towards that. A complex intermingling of the different emotions goes into a romantic love, including such emotions as passion, fear, anger, sexual desire, joy, and jealousy. These are the main things and the main characteristics which are these are the main emotions which are found in them. Then a research was done by Allen, and that said by them that sexual desire is the most important ingredient of the romantic love. Obviously, some of these emotions are the source of anguish, which can lead to other issues such as depression. And another study revealed that the heightened state of romantic love in young adults was linked to the stronger depression, and the anxiety symptoms, but better sleep quality. So this is about the different dimensions. Then when we are talking about this model, then when we are talking about, as you can see, there is an affectionate love. In the affectionate love is more than just passion, and in affectionate love is also called compassionate or companionate love as well. It is a type of love that occurs when someone desires to have other person near and has a deep caring affection for the person. The early stages of love have more romantic love ingredients, but as love matures, passion tends to give way to affection. So we can say that in affectionate love, the passion is going to be missing at some point. And when we are talking about the consummate love, that is going to be the strongest form of love, because there are passion, intimacy and commitment. All three things are there which are required. And the passion, you can define that by as the physical and sexual attraction of another person. Intimacy relates to the emotional feelings of warmth and closeness and attraction and the sharing of the relationship. And the commitment is the cognitive understanding, the thinking pattern, the cognitive understanding and appraisal of the relationship, that they want to maintain that relationship, they want to sustain that relationship. According to Sternberg's theory, the strongest, fullest form of love is consummate love, which involves all three dimensions as well. And when we talk about when we talk about the infatuation, then that is not going to be the strongest form of love. That could be a crush as well. And the couples who have been married for many years used to show affectionate love, because passion used to exit from their relationship after some time. So if passion and commitment are present but intimacy is not present in the relationship, then that is a fatuous love, as when one person worship another from a distance, but if in which there is no intimacy. But if couples share all three dimensions, then their love is going to be consummate. And infatuation, there is no intimacy, there is no commitment, there is just passion or ambition to seek that person. So these are certain different dimensions which we have discussed right now. Now let's move towards the other areas, other important areas in this particular age. That is that when the early adulthood, the falling out of love, that is some collapsed relationship, that is they are going to end some relationship, then it is going to lead toward depression. And ending a close relationship may be wise in some certain situations, because that if that bad relationship or disturbed relationship or in a turmoil or in a traumatic relationship, if that is going to be for a longer period of time, it is going to be have dramatic and drastic traumatic effects on the person's emotional and social well-being as well. So ending a relationship could be wise at some points, because in a relationship where love is not returned, and that could lead to depression, obsessive thoughts, sexual dysfunction, health problems, inability to work effectively, difficulty in making friends and keeping on with their own lifestyle. So when someone is not going to have the same feelings in the give and take form of relationship, so it is better to end that particular relationship. Now let's move towards adult lifestyle. When we are talking about adult lifestyle, then there are single adults, and in single adults, as we can talk about, the stereotypes are associated with being single ranges from swinging single to desperately lonely suicidal single, because these are the stigmas and these are the stereotypes which are associated with the single adults. Because as the person is going to get older in the adulthood, in the early adulthood, as soon they enter the early adulthood, in different cultures the marriage age is going to be considered differently. But in most of the cultures, around 30, people used to think that they are quite late for their marriage, and they are trying to stigmatize them, they are going to stereotype them as well. So it is much more likely that people are going to experience these sort of disturbance if they are not married, and they are going to be considered as suicidal, as lonely. So these are the common problems which is experienced, and forming intimate relationship with other adults is going to be challenging for some times. That society sometimes bias against unmarried adults in that situations, but the advantage of being single in that age is that they can make their own decision in the life, and they can make a more stable and logical decision by meeting all the goals they want to have, and they have all the freedom to make their own decision. They can make their own schedules, they can have their own interest and opportunities. Staying single, and they can explore new places, and they can try out new things, and they can have their own privacy. Once the adult reach the age of 30, they may face increasing pressure to settle down. So it happens in a lot of other cultures as well. Across every age group, more women than men report wanting to pursue their own interests and have personal space, have their own bank accounts, have their regular nights out with the friends, and take vacations on their own. So this is the urge and the wish of the both different genders. Then when we are talking about the marriage and family, and before that I guess we have to talk about the cohabiting adults as well. The cohabitation is that when people used to they prefer to live together in a sexual relationship without being married. So we are not going to discuss that in detail, because that is not that much prevalent or in Pakistan. So according to US figures, we can talk about that cohabitation in just that way, that we just need to understand that what that term is and how that is going to sustain. And the length of cohabitation used to increase an average of 22 months in 2010 compared to 13 months in 1995. So that has decreased much significantly. When we talk about the married adults, then we can talk about different researches which have been done, and a study was done on 502 newlyweds, and they found that nearly all couples held the optimistic forecast about their marriage in the future, and they changed over the next 4 years that how their marriage is going to be in the next 4 years. So despite the optimistic forecast, their marital satisfaction declined across the time frame and the wives with the most optimistic forecast shows the steepest decline in the marital satisfaction. So female were more dissatisfied, even though they had the very much optimistic idea about that. Some statistics of marital partners predict whether the marriage will last longer or not. So two of these most important characteristics are the education and ethnicity. Then when we talk about further about the making marriage work, and there are few ideas and there are few things which can make the marriage work. There John Gottman has done number of researches on the marital satisfaction and how the marriages used to succeed, and he has figured out and he has researched so much thoroughly about the married couples as well. John Gottman gave 7 main practices that help the marriages to succeed. So the first is to establish the love map. Individuals in successful marriages have personal insights and detailed maps of each other's life and the world. They are not psychological strangers, and in good marriages, partners are willing to share their feelings with each other. They use these love maps to express not only their understanding of each other but also their fondness and admiration as well. They are going to respect each other's interest, opportunities. So this is what they are going to have, some map of another person or their partner, so which is going to help them to understand each other better emotionally and psychologically. The next is nurture fondness and admiration. More than 90% of the marriages are successful because they find a way to nurture their partner and to show admiration or fondness towards their partner. So 90% of the time when couples put a positive compliment or admiration in their marriage, they are going to have a very much positive future. Then turn towards each other instead of away is going to be another main principle. for a healthy marriage, that friendship does not keep arguments from occurring, but what friends do is that they used to prevent those differences to be overwhelming. So letting the other person having their own point of view, having their own contradictory point of view, rather than for moving away from that person, you can accept that argument, or you can accept that difference as it is, and you can move along with that particular situation. So that is going to be that both partners are not going to turn away from each other, they are turning towards each other, accepting the differences. So that is going to help and sustain the good marriage. Then let your partner influence you. That bad marriages often involve one spouse is unwilling to share the power with the other, and then in some cultures it used to be husband, in some cases it used to be wife who is unable to give the power or share the power. So they want to be the influencer in that situation. So that cannot lead to a balanced relationship, and that cannot sustain this sort of attitude or temperament, cannot sustain a relationship. Then another principle is solvable conflicts. When we are talking about these solvable conflicts, there are two types of problems which occur in a marriage: the perpetual problems and the solvable problems. The perpetual problem used to be those problems that do not go away, and they may include disagreement about whether for example, whether to have children or not, and how often you want to plan your life move forward. Then the solvable problems could be worked out, and they may include such things as not helping each other, may reduce daily stresses, and not being verbally affectionate. So when people used to have solvable problems, for example, which can be talked about, that one person is very much clumsy and the other partner is very much annoyed by that thing. So that clumsiness or that carelessness could be taken care of. That is solvable by sorting out some sort of solution. So that is a solvable problem. And perpetual problems used to be that there is going to be a strong disagreement and they cannot go that much easily. So it is an advice in that marital therapists used to give, that they found that couples often don't have to solve their perpetual problems for the marriage to work, but to repair their marriages they need to be more tolerant, and they need to solve their solvable problems. The other thing is overcoming the gridlock. That is that one partner wants the other to attend some ceremony or some religious activity, and the other is not having that much. For example, we can say one is introvert and the other is extrovert. That could be one thing, that he don't want to get out and the other person wants the other person to get out. So this is the gridlock, and it is gridlock is not to solve the problem but to move from the gridlock to the dialogue and be patient about that particular situation. The last thing is that create a shared meaning. The more partners can speak respectfully with each other and in a more caring way with each other, sharing their goals with the spouse and working together to achieve each other's goal, is going to have a more sustainable relationship, and it is going to strengthen the relationship. Portman views that other experts on marriage argue that such factors as forgiveness and commitment are important aspects of a successful marriage as well. When we talk about further about this age and after having intimate relationship, when the person is going to get married and they are going to have kids and becoming parents, there are few myths attached to it. We are going to quickly go through these. That the child is going to save their failing marriage, or it is going to be seen that child will make the bond even more stronger. So a possession or extension of the parent, the child will think, feel and behave as the parent did in his or her childhood. So that is not going to be an extension of the parents as well. Having a child gives the parents a second chance to achieve what they wish they had achieved. It is going to be a myth as well. And the parenting is instinctual and requires no training, so it is a myth as well, because it requires some sort of training and it requires some sort of support and some sort of knowledge around that idea. Now let's move on towards the middle adulthood. As we have right now we have discussed some areas in the form of early adulthood, psychosocial and social emotional development. So now we are going to move towards these development in the early in the middle adulthood. And when we are talking about that, let's talk about the Erikson stages which he have given. And in that we found that in middle adulthood, Erikson is going to talk about generativity versus stagnation. That is the stage, and generativity is going to encompass the adult desire to leave the legacies of themselves to the next generations. They are going to do something good. They want to have some sort of advantages in their life which is going to be beneficial. They are going to do some those things which are going to be beneficial for the next generation. And stagnation is being self-absorption, in which the person is going to develop, in which the individual sense that they have done nothing for the next generation. Generativity can be developed in number of ways. For example, we can say that there is biological generativity, that the person or the adult are going to have their children. That is biological generativity. The parental generativity is that they are going to nurture their child, they are going to guide their child, they are going to grow their child, and they are going to nurture and train their child. That is parental generativity. Then the work generativity is that they are going to develop skills which are going to pass towards others as well. Then there is work generativity. After work generativity, there is cultural generativity, in which the adults create, renovate, conserve some aspects of their culture. They might be part of some social work and all those things. And in adults used to promote and guide the next generation by parenting, teaching, leading, or doing things. So these things could work towards their betterment and towards their generativity as well. Now let's talk about the stability and change in the middle adulthood. And there are certain different longitudinal studies which are very much essential to be discussed over here. And when we are talking about longitudinal study, the first study we can discuss is of Costa and McCary Baltimore study, in which they have linked they have figured out different personalities and the individuals at different points in their life. And in this particular study, they have the research studies point towards these factors and important dimensions of personalities, and they found they focused on the big 5 personality traits under this study. Then in further in this study, they have recruited 1,000 college educated men and women around the age 20 to 96 years of age and assessed them over many years over the course of data. The data collection was started in 1950s and is still ongoing. The stability is going, there was the idea, and they concluded from this study that stability used to occur in the 5 personality factors: emotional stability, extraversion, openness, agreeableness, and conscientiousness. However, most recent research indicates that greater developmental changes in the 5 personality factors in adulthood are going to be found in the emotional stability, extraversion, openness, and agreeableness were lower in early adulthood, the stability in that, and they peaked between 40 to 60 years of age and decreased in the late adulthood, while conscientiousness showed a continuous increase from the early adulthood to late adulthood. And most research studies indicate that the greatest change occur in the early adulthood as well. So these are few findings of that particular research study which was done. And the big 5 factors indicate that they are related to such important aspects of the person's life and health, life as health, intelligence, cognitive functioning, achievement, work, and relationships. So these are all the important aspects which are being linked to that particular thing. Then we are going to talk about Berkeley's longitudinal study. In that longitudinal study that was started in 1920s and 30s and early 30s, and some statistics which were more stable, they found that some statistics were more stable than the others, and the most stable statistics were the degree to which the individuals were intellectually oriented, self-confident, and open to new experiences. So these were the statistics which were stable. The person is, the first is intellectual orientation, their self-confidence, their openness to new experiences. Then the characteristics that change the most over time are included to the extent to which the individual were nurturant or hostile to, or whether or not they had the good self-control. So these were the characteristics which were not that much consistent and they could be changed throughout time. Then another study was Helson's Mill College study. In there were 3 groups of women, and they just studied the women, 132 women, and they took them from when they were in their senior college, and they studied them again and again after in their 30s, 40s, and their 50s as well. And they figured out that there are 3 main groups among these mill women. The one is family oriented, the second is career oriented, and third that they have no path in their life. So they discovered in this research that commitment to the task of early adulthood, whether it could be career, whether or rather it could be family, or both, these things are going to be their commitment area. So that used to help the women to learn to control their impulses. They help them to develop in their interpersonal skills. They made them independent, and they work hard to achieve their goals. In comparison to the women who did not commit themselves to any path of life, and who lived their lifestyle, and they faced no challenges, and they faced fewer challenges than the other women, but they did not develop fully, and they did not reach their full potential as well. So these are few longitudinal studies. So we can conclude over here that personality traits continue to change during the adult years, even into late adulthood as well. Cumulative personality model says that with time and age, people become more adept at interacting with the environment in ways that promote stability of personality. The greatest change we can say is going to be around in 20 to 40 years of age, and this, according to this cumulative personality model of personality development, states that there are ways to promote increased stability and personality over time as well. Now let's move towards the close relationship, the love and marriage relationship in the midlife. When we are talking about marriage in that phase, then there are situations in which the rocky and difficult marriage in the early adulthood is going to improve in the middle adulthood as well. Their partners may have lived through the great deal of trauma, through great deal of ups and downs, that they have discovered a solid foundation in their relationship, and they can live towards that. They now in the middle life, they are not very much concerned about financial worries. They have less houseworks, and they have more time together, and most married individuals are satisfied with their marriage during midlife. Divorce in middle adulthood may be more positive in some ways and more negatives in others. For example, sometimes people used to take it, and the one important thing over here is that the rate of divorce in the late adulthood and in the old age has considerably increased than the previous years, and it has considerably decreased in the early years and in the early adulthood. And the reason for that is that maybe that is because of the changing view of the woman, and that could be that women now initiate more divorce in the relationships at the middle or the old age, because they are now more independent and there is less stigma attached, so they consider themselves to be out of the unhappy marriage more often. And the reason for middle age and older adult women cited for their divorce is that verbal, physical or emotional abuse, the alcohol or drug abuse could be there, cheating is one source to be there, and sometimes there are no obvious reasons but different values and lifestyles which make them to take the divorce from their partner. When we talk about the empty nest and its refilling, the empty nest syndrome, as you all know, that when the children are launched when they are in their adult life, that is that marital satisfaction seems to be decreased when the children used to leave home. But it is not the case always, because sometimes marital satisfaction also increase, and the marital satisfaction is going to be satisfied because now the partner have more time for each other, and they are going to have the quality of time. And when we are talking about the refilling empty nest is also common, because sometimes when the adults are going to come back after several years of college, or after completing their graduation or studies, and even if they lose some job or something, so in the middle generation is also provided support for the younger generation even after they have been launched. So adult children complain that their parents are restricting them in their independence, and there is a loss of privacy when they refill the nest as well. Then there is a disturbance among these values, and when they are living with their adult parents and their age as well. Then let's talk about grandparenting. When we are talking about the grandparents, grandparents usually play a very important role in grandchildren lives when family cries. When family carries some sort of divorce, death, illness, abandonment, or poverty, or even when mother is also working, so sometimes grandchildren used to take care of the children as well. So these are the prominent roles which grandparents used to play in their life. So when we are talking about the roles, then there are three grandparenting styles which are dominant: the formal, fun-seeking, and distant figure. The formal figure is going to be that they perform that what was considered to be proper and prescribed role. These grandparents showed a strong interest in their grandchildren, but were careful not to give child rearing advice. And in the fun seeking, they are going to be totally informal, playful, interesting, having all the layer activities with the child and the grandchildren. And the last distant figure are not having substantial large number of grandparents used to be in the distant figures, because they are benevolent, but their interactions are not going to be that much frequent. So that was all about this topic. So if you have any questions, just feel free to ask me. Thank you.